Welcome to Implement This with Microsoft Business Solutions MVP Britta Rexstead and co-host Matthew C. Anderson, where we have an insider's discussion around the things we consider when implementing Dynamics 365. In today's episode, Britta and I discuss OneNote integration with Dynamics. But first, we'd like to thank today's sponsor. Kingsway Soft is a leading integration solution provider offering software solutions that make data integration affordable and painlessly easy. Thousands of enterprise clients from over 70 countries and regions rely on Kingsway Soft to integrate data with various business systems in order to drive their business efficiency and fully leverage their information assets. Kingsway Soft is a leading provider of Microsoft Dynamics integration software, including Dynamics 365, CRM, AX, NAV, GP, SL, as well as many other applications. Check out their Fall 2017 release that includes multi-threading and audit log deletion. And now, on with the show. All right, so here we are coming back with another episode of Implement This. Hi, Britta, how are you?
Good, Matt, how are you?
I'm doing so well. I'm stoked about this episode. You know why?
Why?
We have a legitimate listener question that came in that we get to talk about in this episode.
Nice.
So I will start by reading this. So the question came in. We are in the process of jumping from 2013 on-prem to Dynamics 365 online. Of the many features that we'll be exploring as part of that upgrade, one of them is OneNote integration as a replacement of the traditional note structure records in early versions of CRM. Would love to hear your take on the OneNote integration versus traditional notes in CRM, pros, cons, etc.
Ooh.
Yeah?
Yeah, there's definitely an episode in that.
Probably multiple, but let's try to
let's try to keep it to one.
Let's try to start with one. So I guess the first thing is before we dive too deep into some of the pros, cons, differences between using like notes inside of the platform versus OneNote is just kind of the basic use cases for OneNote. Mm-hmm. So, I think the most foundational one that I think of is that place to be able to collaborate about a specific customer, a specific opportunity, where you may have multiple people who are capturing notes about that customer, about that deal, or what have you. Mm-hmm. And the notes inside of CRM are not nearly as robust or free-form or formatable as you can have in OneNote, and also maybe not as accessible to people who are outside of CRM. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you have a OneNote notebook that is accessible through CRM and you have people who aren't in the platform itself, you can get to that information. Mm-hmm. So, that's like the first place I think of like, well, why would you even think about doing this when it's already inside of the platform?
Yeah, exactly.
Are there any other, what are the use cases that pop to mind for you?
One that I haven't gotten to play with, but I'm really curious about, is playing with Flow and OneNote in CRM.
Oh.
Have you seen anything with that?
I have not.
I know you can do some playing in OneNote, and Flow is really exciting, because that might be a way that we can hack a little more. My gut reaction is, are you sacrificing data and all of the kind of control and structure and automation that you would need? I'm biased enough to think you'd need in a good CRM implementation for this really free-form, collaborative OneNote experience. And then also there's some bit of a generational divide. If you have some people on your team who love OneNote from their phone, and so they're going to heavily use that, but then other people on your team aren't going to get used to OneNote, then are you doing double entry, or things in two places, or people getting more disconnected? Yeah,
so there are a couple of things that you talked about in there that I'd like to parse through. The first one is around the kind of control or capability that you have around with it. What do you mean when you say that?
So it's entirely unstructured data, and so, for example, I can't search an advanced find for something in a OneNote notebook. Mm-hmm. That data isn't structured in any particular way, and so it works really well for free-form things or hand-drawn notes, or maybe I want some audio in there, but it's not data in fields. Mm-hmm. I can pull. I can't put that into a report. I can't write a workflow off of it. I can't automate it. I can't lock it down and secure it and say, you can change these 3 things, but not these 5. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'm just being a control freak. I think it's a little too wild west for my taste.
Well, but on the flip side of that, if it's sitting inside of Dynamics, it's not necessarily searchable through a OneNote notebook or through Delve or through some of those other places that you might otherwise go to search for information. I mean, yes, granted, if you're inside of CRM and everybody that you're working with is inside of CRM, that's great. But if they're not, you're kind of cutting off those people if you don't have this on-ramp to get to the information. So I don't know if I'm...
Yeah, it might even be, you almost wonder if OneNote not integrated is more powerful. If you really love OneNote, is the best thing really to hook it up? I mean, if you're going to use Delve, if you're going to really use Office 365 online, use the full platform, are you shooting yourself in the foot by integrating your OneNote?
Well, I mean, I think that's a fair question, and where I would go is asking the question of, are you going to try to force people to access the OneNote specifically through the Dynamics platform? I mean, if we get into some of the realities around when you actually turn this on, and we can talk about how you turn it on a little later in the episode, but I mean, when you are considering using this, the way that the CRM side of it is hooked up is you have a record in CRM, you go to, in the classic CRM interface, you go to a tab in the activities pane called OneNote, and it shows you a list of all your tabs there, and you can get to it that way. If you're in
it's just a link to the OneNote, though. I mean, you can't, once you open it, you're just in OneNote. You're not in CRM.
Absolutely. It's a pop-up that goes into either another tab or what have you, and you can also link that from your desktop OneNote or your mobile OneNote as well. So, I mean, there's kind of both sides, advantage, disadvantage of that. But then once that's actually in there, I mean, say you have the unified user interface, it's just literally one link to go to OneNote from the record. So it's almost doubling down on the fact that, yes, you are jumping to another part of the Microsoft ecosystem to get here. Let's not try to pretend and have it look CRM-ish. It's like, no. For this record, click here and it's going to go to CRM. And I think that helps go some way toward addressing that user inconsistency that used to be out there a little bit more on the OneNote side of things if you try to use it, because it's like, well, is this in CRM or is it not in CRM? And I think where they've gone with some of it helps. Though, I mean, to your point, like, is that perfect? Is it the right place to push people? I'm not sure. And that could be based on how much is your team using OneNote. Do they have a real big practice around that and trying to get them to push that information into Dynamics is kind of a non-starter. Because, hey, if they have the platform of OneNote that they're used to using and they don't really want to double enter that into CRM, then, well, don't force them to, right? And let's keep using that platform. But as I think through the reality of it, when you go in through a CRM record to open up that OneNote section from the link or the notebook from the link, you are limited to only that one that was created through the CRM interface. And I think that's an important thing to understand if you're considering OneNote inside of Dynamics is the only OneNote notebook that's going to have that integration that we're talking about is one that's created starting with Dynamics 365. So
it's created for you. It's not saying we've had this notebook for 2 years. Let's hook it up to an account.
Exactly. There's
the other way around.
there's no kind of backwards compatibility to retroactively say, hey, we've been capturing all this information about XYZ customer. I said Z because why not? But XYZ customer, let's get that information showing in Dynamics in this in the activities panel. It's just it doesn't work that way. I mean, there are some workarounds that you can use to get something approximating that, where you could take your OneNote notebook, you could move it into a folder that's linked through SharePoint, and you could pull up that SharePoint or even OneDrive site where the OneNote notebook is and pull it up manually. But that's not quite the I mean, that's not the intent of how quote-unquote easy this is supposed to be, and what that truly integrated user experience is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think another part of the question I'm going to look at is this a replacement for traditional notes in CRM? Because that was something else that we were asked. And my gut reaction is no. Now, notes in CRM I both love and hate because they are very...
As many do.
As many do. You can't do anything to them. And so they're so locked down. It might be the most locked down record type in CRM. I mean, there's no mercy. You can kind of write workflows if one of those 3 fields happen to be what you needed.
Yeah, good luck.
You got a little bit of security you can play with, but it's very, very limiting. And so they're great in really clear-cut scenarios if people are trained to use them. If it already fit your process before in Notes, I don't see an upgrade as the reason you stop using Notes. If it wasn't a good fit for your process, so you use tasks instead, I don't think OneNote solves that either. I think there's a requirements gathering around what Notes did for you pre-upgrade, and they probably still fit that now. I think I don't think there's kind of a either or here. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think to the question of is it an either or, probably not for most organizations. I mean, for the way I've seen most clients use Notes, and the annotations entity within CRM is a combination of wanting to be able to capture attachments, which is kind of a different use case than what you would use the OneNote integration for.
Yeah.
And frankly, for a lot of the little onesie, twosie comment kind of things, that's really more geared toward either the activity timeline or, with the unified user interface and the, kind of the unified timeline that now exists. That speaks to more of that need. So it's more around kind of supplementary information, or you're in a sales call working on a specific opportunity, or you are sitting down with a client trying to do some road mapping with them, strategic planning, and you need a place to be able to capture those notes. That to me is more the use case where you get the biggest bang for your buck for enabling the OneNote integration. And that is more of a yes and than it is an either or type of situation.
Yeah, I'd agree. I also think traditional notes in CRM are not collaborative. I have seen organizations try to use them collaboratively. I've never seen it work. I tend to keep mine pretty locked down. So people can create notes, and if they need to add something, they create another note. Because I don't like people writing over other people's notes, and I don't like the, timestamps getting messy and all of those things. And so I think OneNote can be a great tool for integration. I use it for a lot of other things. We even use it here on the show for collaboration. So it's a great tool. Not knocking OneNote. I think it kind of feels to me, I'm a little jaded when it comes to things like iframes. This kind of feels like an iframe integration, where it's like, ooh, it's integrated. I can look at it.
It's a pop-up. It's not an iframe. Yeah, it's a pop-up. Is that better or worse?
But that was something that, I'm from the world of finance, and back in 2011, there were a lot of really sparkly, shiny, expensive integrations with air quotes around them that were really just iframes. And that always irked me because I want data that I can do something with. Yeah. And you can't do that in an iframe. And I kind of feel like that with OneNote. It's not knocking the tool you're integrating, but what value do I get for integrating it?
Well, and there's a certain amount of expectation setting that's in there, because if you're looking for an integration, then no, I mean, OneNote doesn't have that tight integration in that way, but it is a connecting point between the Dynamics platform and the Office 365 platform. And if you have people that want to use OneNote and are going to have it on their desktop, they're going to have it on their mobile device, and it's a place where they and their team feel like they can collaborate, and I think collaboration is an important part of that underlying use case, then OneNote can be a great addition to the way that they're going to collaborate. But it certainly comes with its kind of cost that's associated with that. I mean, we've talked a little bit about the search side of it, but another one is reporting. I mean, trying to report on information, interactions in CRM and notes, reporting on annotations is messy in the first place. But when you consider, I want to see the OneNote notes associated with a specific account. Well, that goes outside of Dynamics, and good luck associating that connection back to the context of a specific customer, because when you use the Dynamics platform to capture a note, a formal note within that structure, there's stuff that's automatically attached to it, that metadata of which account record you were on, or case record you were on, opportunity, lead, what have you, that you're not going to get your average user to capture in their OneNote notebook to make it searchable. And even if they did, it's not stored in a structured way that you can have a standardized search around it. So it becomes tough, and a question of expectation setting from my perspective.
Yeah, there's also the security sense. I have to trust people to not delete things. I mean, you can have one user really ruin it for a lot of other people, and that can be a problem. And then as we're seeing, as compliance burdens keep going up in a lot of industries, and especially for, now just international laws are getting heavier and heavier, not be able to find personally identifiable information. That's really going to be a big ask. We, in HIPAA and so many things, we have to be really responsible with certain types of data. And unstructured formats like this are scary to me because we just don't have this level of leverage. Yeah,
absolutely. And that's something where, aside from this question of are we putting that into, OneNote as an extension to the Dynamics platform, that's something where more and more we're having to ask that question within the Dynamics platform itself. Asking those questions around field level security, asking those questions around we've historically been able to take this concept of security through obscurity, and if nobody's able to find it, that's kind of good enough. And more that's being put to the test. And I think especially with OneNote and these, the OneNote notebooks that are generated through the Dynamics platform are ones that multiple people have access to. So you have to consider who is able to search and see this information. As you consider things like the Microsoft Groups integration that comes with as an add-in to Dynamics 365, that's one where you have, when you create that group from a record in Dynamics, it starts out as a private group with a restriction, more of a restriction around who can actually see that. And there's tie-ins to be able to grant more access to that, but by definition, it's a little more restrictive. And I think that it's not surprising to think through the fact that the OneNote integration in Dynamics came out before the Groups integration came out, and they learned some things in how they put that together and how they built it out.
That's a great point. So assuming someone does actually want to do it, because there are organizations that this will absolutely fit for.
There absolutely are. So a couple of requirements that they have to have for this within Office 365, you need to have the platform of SharePoint to be able to collaborate on, and all of your users of Dynamics who are going to access these notebooks, or even outside of Dynamics, would have to have a SharePoint license, which comes with most Office 365 subscriptions that would be available. And then once you're setting that up within the Dynamics platform, you need to enable server-based SharePoint integration. So that's kind of the default way of setting that up these days. When you're setting that up, it's not historically there was a way to set up an integration to SharePoint that happened with more client-side interaction. It was more of a visual integration, if you will, in that it wasn't through the plumbing of Dynamics that you were seeing that SharePoint side. But at this point, that it really is put together through Dynamics that's supporting that. So you would set up your SharePoint integration first. set that up, enable it for whichever entities you choose, and then from there you would want to set up the OneNote integration for whichever entities that are SharePoint enabled that you want.
Oh, okay.
So what that means is you can't have a OneNote enabled entity unless it is also a SharePoint enabled entity.
Oh, okay. So there's a lot of spots if you miss a box, a checkbox, it's not going to work.
Yeah, and you know, it's one of those questions of you can think through that situation where, well, it'd be nice if we could do just OneNote but not have that additional SharePoint site that's the collaboration space where someone could upload a document if you have another place that you're trying to direct them to. And when you think about things like repeatable process, consistency from person to person, from deal to deal, from client to client, from case to case, having too many different options without a lot of guidance for people can be problematic.
Yeah, it's that old if nothing's required, then everything's optional. So if your process is that open-ended, then you're going to get really kind of a mixed bag.
Yeah. So then, a couple other things, and I don't know how much you've run into on the actual implementation side, but there are some little gotchas at runtime that I think are worth sharing. So, one that I've run into is if you have special characters in the name of the record that you're creating a OneNote notebook for, you get a kind of goofy error message. The one where I've really seen this is using the pipes character. So, below your backspace key, backslash, and then if above that you have the pipes. Those in a record name are going to cause that creation of the OneNote notebook to fail. And in order to be able to kind of undo that and try doing it again takes a lot of steps. I mean, you can Google around for it, Bing around for it to be able to find the workaround of how do I undo that mistake I made, change the name. If you have access to change the name of the record, then go create the OneNote notebook again. But it's a real hassle.
What about ampersands?
So I don't know off the top of my head if ampersands are problematic. I think they do okay.
You'd hope so. Those are so common, like in account names.
Yeah.
That's just all the time.
Yeah. I mean, pipes are the first one for me, but I know special characters in general have had problems. Percent signs, not so much, which makes me think ampersand's probably the same category. Okay. But ampersand in the name of like an account are just so ubiquitous. Thinking of you down in Bradstreet. A couple other things when you create that first, create the notebook. It takes a few seconds for it to actually generate on the SharePoint side before that opens up for you. And then the name of that default section for you, if you're not in the unified user interface, you see the name of it, it comes across as Untitled. And when you change the name of that section in your notebook, you go back into CRM and it still says Untitled. You try to refresh, you try to do a hard refresh and figure that out, it still says Untitled. Once it associates a name with that section, you're kind of stuck with that.
Ooh.
And that's true most obviously for the default section because it calls it Untitled, but that carries through to additional sections that you create as well. And they've updated that with the unified user interface a little bit because they don't show the names of each of the sections. You just link out to the OneNote notebook. You click on the OneNote button and boom, it pops you out to that notebook. It doesn't matter what the sections are called because it's not trying to make that seem like it's Dynamics native information.
Yeah.
The other things that I've run into are around if you try changing around the file structure, some of the file types that are typically hidden behind the scenes, like the .1 TOC2, I think it is. file that's usually a hidden file, like on your desktop, but is really hidden out there, you can see it a lot more easily in SharePoint. And you might say, well, this is garbage. I want to delete that. If you delete that, you run into problems of having Dynamics be able to open up that notebook again, even if it's right there and you can see it in the SharePoint integration.
Okay.
So, as I say this, I feel like it's so easy when you talk about a technical topic like this to have all of these little gotchas seem as, oh, well, there's all these gotchas, you really don't want to do it. I mean, I do encourage you to think through how would we use this and is it a good fit? Because some of those gotchas are straightforward training things of, you're going to have to live with the fact that it's difficult to change the name of this initial section that's created. And as our best practice, when you create that notebook, create a new section calling it general or the name of the customer or whatever that is, and delete the original section that was created by default. That'll drop it out of the list. That's not that big of a deal. It takes, only a few minutes worth of training for someone to understand that. And if you have the right team that's receptive to that kind of couple-step manual process, that's not a big deal. But I think for the sake of this type of discussion, it's a real part of the consideration of, do people need that button that just says easy in big capital letters across the front of it? And if they do, well, then maybe those extra couple of steps will be too much.
Yeah, I think it's really, it comes down to culture, and if it's the right fit, I mean, you have to do some real thinking through the requirements. What is you're trying to accomplish? For some organizations, it's going to be awesome, and for some, I think it wouldn't be worth the hassle. Or if you get too sloppy with making the decision, you might actually run into trouble where it's you lose that legacy bit of notes that maybe was really valuable for a department or something else. So like in all things, you just have to take your time. Make good decisions, think it through. Yeah,
well, and especially if you're considering, an upgrade from 2013 to Dynamics 365, what are you going to do with the history of notes that you have? I mean, there's not a great way to be able to upgrade and bring those into OneNote for you.
Yeah.
So are you bringing those into notes inside of CRM, Dynamics 365, so you have them there? But then you want everything new to be in OneNote as well. Like, what is that user experience going to be? Are you asking people? Are you putting out a report or capturing those down and putting them into notes on behalf of people? What's that process going to be like? Will it be findable? Will people understand? Those are some questions when you look at the upgrade side of this, where going from note record to note record is a lot more straightforward as you're doing the actual technical upgrade piece of it.
Oh yeah, definitely. You're not really. I mean, it doesn't even look different. On the back end side, it's really
but on the other side of that, I'll go against what I was just saying. How beautiful of a thing is it if you want people to start using the OneNote integration? If you've taken the annotations that they have, those notes, and dropped them into OneNote, and here's the way that you can get to those. I mean, if you're able to serve that up on kind of a silver platter, it will almost help drive some of that early adoption, at least being able to get into the notebooks, because that's where they need to go to see some of that historic information.
Other than an army of interns, I don't know how you get that done, though. If you know, please email us. That is a flow I would love to see, but I don't know that it exists. That seems like just a lot of intern work.
Yeah, I mean, manual effort for sure, but depending on size of organization, number of records that this is relevant for, number of active records that you care to do it for, the juice could be worth the squeeze. So I hate to, I consider the prospective audience that we're talking in front of right now, and I work with a fair number of enterprise clients, but there are people who have not that many folks who are in Dynamics 365, and that could influence how much of a true effort that would be. Maybe it would be an army of one intern that would actually have to do that, and it's definitely worthwhile for doing that.
Interesting. Well, I'm excited to hear the feedback on this one. I think there's great reasons to use it. There's legitimate concerns about it. I mean, I think there's. I'm looking forward to hearing from the community on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. And if so first off, thank you, Todd, for sending in this question. Really appreciate that you're out there and listening and writing in with questions. And I hope you are the inspiration for other people to write in with those real world questions. If you do have feedback, want to continue in on the conversation, check out our website, Implement This, and feel free to add a comment into this the show notes on this. And then also feel free to respond on social media with your thoughts and whatnot as we tweet about this episode.
Mm-hmm. Right.
All right. Well, I think that pretty much does it for me. How about you?
Sounds good. Thanks,
all right.
Matt.
Yep. Take care, Britta.
You've been listening to Implement This with Britta Rexted and Matthew C. Anderson. If you have a business problem you'd like us to discuss on the show, reach us through our website, implementthis.org, where you can also subscribe to the podcast. We're on Twitter, too. Britta is at MacGyverCRM, and I'm at MC Anderson. Thanks so much for listening.